All right. So I looked at one of these essays a while back in this Discovering Ayn Rand ebook, or whatever you want to call it, from the Foundation for Economic Education. And I was pretty critical of it. And I wanted to take a look at another one. So I'm going to do that and just respond as I go along. I skimmed a bit, but I didn't do like a careful read through of this in advance. It just kind of caught my interest. So we have this essay here, The Sanction of the Victim. And you can see I've already highlighted like the very first sentence. I'm not gonna be too I'm gonna detain myself too much over this, but the very first sentence says few libertarian authors generate more heated disagreement than Ayn Rand. Now, if just libertarian had been struck here, there we go. Now I'm happy with this. But alas, this frames Ayn Rand as a libertarian. She was very much not a libertarian. She despised libertarianism. Um, and she saw it as a not very coherent political whatever entity that or movement's the word that was sort of heavily ripping her off in some high level ideas but without a lot of understanding. um but so with that, but yes, she's very controversial. So whatever her flaws, she could often be a very sharp observer of human behavior and human culture. What are the flaws that the author thinks Ayn Rand has? I'm curious. But again, true, she could often be a very sharp observer of human behavior and human culture. And there are ways to put those observations into use beyond politics and in interpersonal relationships instead. Okay, I'm not a huge fan of the writing here, but that's again, it's not a big deal, and it's true. Um, I would say her her ideas are often engaged with at the political level and at the level of economics to the extent she gets into that because it's so connected with the political. Um, but like the value, and there's tremendous value there in terms of her thought, in terms of the contribution that objectivism has to offer there. But yeah, there's a lot more than just that, and that is often underplayed and underappreciated by even by people who consider themselves objectivists. I forget about just like a fan who's from another part of the right, like a libertarian or a Christian conservative or something. All right, so we have this passage here. The primary moral message of Atlas Shrugged, I would argue, is the idea that evil has, to a large degree, only the power that its victims grant it. Now, my reaction, and I've considered this a bit and thought about it, is that I disagree with this. I think this is an important theme, and it's an important idea to talk about in the context of the book. I don't think it's the primary moral message, though. I have some thoughts on that, but for now, I'm just going to read a bit and see, because it looks like the author is going to lay out their case on this point, and I don't want to. I want to read their thoughts before I go into my own thoughts, which I've reflected on a bit already. So, okay. So consider the image that provides the book's title. Francisco de Anconia asks a party guest, if you saw Atlas, the giant who holds the world on his shoulders, if you saw that he stood, blood running down his chest, his knees buckling, his arms trembling, but still trying to hold the world aloft with the last of its strength, and the greater his effort, the heavier the world bore down upon his shoulders, what would you tell him to do? Francisco answers his own question to shrug. So I guess they're trying to not spoiler that it's Reardon, who Francisco's talking to. I'm going to assume anybody watching this video has read the book already, so I'm not even going to. It's like, if you haven't, then that should probably be a higher priority than my commentary anyway. The point here is that Atlas is only a victim because of his willingness to think that he is morally obligated to suffer to continue doing the thing that is crushing him. The concept is refined further in the book and is best summarized as the importance of the sanction of the victim. In the book's political economy, this idea refers to the fact that the creators and producers continue to work hard at what they love, even as those around them made it increasingly more difficult to do so. Like Atlas, the weight of the looters continued to bear down on the attempts of the producers to keep the railways and steel factories open. What John Galt does is to try to convince them all that it is time to shrug. Wow, that's a pretty big spoiler. To withdraw their sanction from the very code that made them victims. That's weird that... Okay, I don't really get the spoiler policy then. For most of the main characters in the book, the key moment is when they realize they are complicit in their own unhappiness because they have accepted the moral code of their victimizers. That is why Rand insisted, both in her novels and nonfiction, on the importance of philosophy, and especially ethics. What's with the spacing on this line? Characters like Hank Reardon don't think they need philosophy, as they can just continue doing what they love and ignore the people who try to bring them down. Without philosophy, Rand argues, Hank and the others who Galt tries to get to join him in his strike cannot understand their own victimization. Alright, so I think I'm gotten the idea, so I went back up to the where the moral message of Atlas Shrugged, according to this person, was summarized. So, the primary moral message of Atlas Shrugged, I would argue, is that it's the idea that evil has, to a large degree, only the power that its victims grant to it. So again, I think this is an important theme. I don't think it's the primary moral message. I am going to try and argue that. The reason is that I don't think Atlas Shrugged is about evil. And I don't think that Rand's intent or goal or purpose was to portray evil. She had to portray evil some in order to depict certain aspects of the world in a realistic way. It's sort of dialed up with more pure versions in her fictional world, but still portraying real things, still portraying real aspects of people's personalities, at least. But thinking about evil wasn't the purpose, and so I I don't think that a primary moral message centered around the nature of evil would be what I don't think that's something that would be the primary moral message of Atlas Shrugged. So what would it be? Well, I think we'd have to look at what Rand's like purpose and goals were, and what she said about like the theme of Atlas Shrugged, and think about that. So this is the essay, "The Goal of My Writing" from the Romantic Manifesto, which you can get for free online, courtesy of the Ayn Rand Institute. So what does Rand say? The motive and purpose of my writing is the projection of an ideal man, the portrayal of a moral ideal. And this won't let me highlight words here. As my ultimate literary goal, as an end in itself, to which any didactic, intellectual, or philosophical values contained in a novel are only the means. And then, skipping ahead, my purpose, first cause, and prime mover is a portrayal of hard work or John Galt or Hank Reardon, Francisco d'Anconia as an end in himself, not as a means to any further end. So the focus on ideal and on the heroes, I think, indicates that the moral message is going to be something positive, in the sense that it's not going to be about the nature of evil, but about the nature of good. Morality is, it's knowledge for guiding your action in life. And there's certainly a role for negatives in a moral system, like don't kill innocent people. But you need positive ideas and positive values, and projecting that, I think, in the form of an ideal man was what Rand was going after. And like, if you look at a lot of people's response, in particular to The Fountainhead and Hard Work, a lot of people find a lot of value in trying to imagine how Rourke might handle a situation. You could take that too far if that's not really you, if you're just trying to sort of cargo cult it. But it could still be useful just to get a different perspective, about how you might consider handling or reacting to some situation. The reason that works at all is because the whole book is about Rourke and how Rourke lives in a positive way, and about his attitudes, and the manner of living his life. And it's also about secondhandedness, and secondhandedness is a big theme, but it's a big theme in contrast to Rourke's first-handedness. If all there were in The Fountainhead were, portrayals of second-handers and no Rourke, that would be a pretty disappointing novel. It wouldn't be very, very objectivist, and it'd be missing a big part of the morality of it. This is also from the Romantic Manifesto. Rand's talking about the theme, which she describes as the summation of a novel's abstract meaning. The theme of Atlas Shrugged is the role of the mind in man's existence. So the primary moral message of Atlas Shrugged, I think, is going to come out of the theme in some way, and it's going to be a positive thing. This is from the Galt speech. He's talking about the mind. He's talking about the mind as the means of survival, quite literally. If you abandon the mind, you'll be destroyed on an individual level, and if a bunch of people in a society abandon the mind, they'll be destroyed on a societal level. And indeed, that's what happens. So I was just looking at this this scene where Dagny encounters the guard while trying to get to Galt, and has to shoot him, and the guard doesn't know what he should do, and Dagny is not going to let him, phone a friend to see if she's actually supposed to be in that facility. The voice of the narrator here, calmly and impersonally, she who would have hesitated to fire at an animal pulled the trigger and fired straight at the heart of a man who had wanted to exist without the responsibility of consciousness. So this is somebody who abandoned the mind. There's different ways of doing that. James Taggart, is another case, and is a big evader. And he's just another illustration of that sort of abandonment of the mind. But then what about the heroes? Well, when Galt is giving a speech, and it's talking to the good people who might still be out there in the world, he says, accept the irrevocable fact that your life depends upon your mind. This is the part I wanted to go into a bit. So Galt says, accept the fact that the achievement of your happiness is the only moral purpose of your life, and that happiness, not pain or mindless self-indulgence, is the proof of your moral integrity, since it is the proof and the result of your loyalty to the achievement of your values. Happiness was the responsibility you dreaded. It required the kind of rational discipline you did not value yourself enough to assume. And the anxious staleness of your days is the monument to your evasion of the knowledge that there is no moral substitute for happiness, that there is no more despicable coward than the man who deserted the battle for his joy, fearing to assert his right to existence, lacking the courage and the loyalty to life of a bird or a flower reaching for the sun. Discard the protective rags of that vice which you called a virtue, humility. Learn to value yourself, which means to fight for your happiness. And when you learn that pride is the sum of all virtues, you will learn to live like a man. Now, I would argue that something like this connection between rationality, happiness, integrity, and pride, with a particular emphasis on the importance of rationality, an unbreached rationality, unafraid to engage in judgments, unafraid to assert itself and to defend itself on the basis of reason and arguments. That would be more, that would be closer to the primary moral message of Atlas Shrugged. It'd be, if I were to try and sum it up, it would be something like, if you want to have true happiness, don't put anything above reason, and don't put anyone else above yourself. And not granting the sanction of the victim is important, but it's not it's not complete. It's not, it doesn't capture a big chunk because of what's going on. Because, so like the sanction of the victim is something I think of in terms of the heroes. Like Reardon is giving his sanction for all sorts of terrible stuff that his wife and family is doing. And Dagny is unwittingly participating in empowering the looters by continuing to work at the railroad. But the broader point about the importance of an unbreached rationality and integrity and living for yourself and how that connects with happiness, that's something that's a more general point that applies to even the looters and moochers. It explains why they're unhappy, like like James Taggart or Reardon's mom or Lillian. These are not happy, independent, productive people. Why? Because they haven't lived for themselves and they haven't tried to live life in a rational way. Lives aren't defined by like their productivity, their values, or their interests, but their relationships. And Lillian's case to her husband, and James Taggart's case to his friends. Ultimately, the sanction of the victim thing bites them because, Reardon says, screw this, and ultimately so does Dagny. And so the people around them that were in a sort of parasitic dependent relationship find themselves, in trouble. But the fact that the bad people in Atlas are victimizers and moochers and looters, it's sort of a downstream consequence for a more basic error, from a more basic error, which is to reject the mind, rationality, and dealing with reality instead focus on trying to dominate and control and manipulate other people. Those are my thoughts on that sentence and what follows. Let's see what else there is. So the author says Reardon's relationship provides one example. I assume he means with Lillian. He had a few relationships that were problematic in the book, but he's talking about partner. So, if you're in a relationship where it seems impossible to please your partner, despite your best honest efforts to do so, it's likely to make you miserable. Here's where it's worth asking if you bear some responsibility by having bought into your partner's problematic value scale that makes pleasing him or her impossible. I kind of wonder how relatable people find Lillian and Hank's relationship to their own, because to me, Lillian comes off as a cruel and sadistic villain. And I know a lot of people often have very negative views of their former relationships. But if you're trying to analyze a relationship you're in, I wonder if you could relate Lillian and Hank's relationship to that. I think some of the family stuff with like Reardon's mom and whatnot is something that might be more relatable, but I don't know about Lillian. I could be wrong though. I haven't really thought that through. By agreeing to a set of rules that has rigged the game against you, you agree to lose and forgo your own happiness. You have given that person the sanction that turns you into a victim by agreeing to a code that ensures you can never win. See, this, you know, I've spoken with people and they've okay actually missed that Lillian was even supposed to really be bad. Um, which is it seems incredible to me, but there you are. Um, but anyway, I wonder. I guess I wonder who the audience is for this essay and how helpful they're gonna find this paragraph, especially that in quotes, because even if they've read the book, this is pretty abstract and vague. When I talk about when I talk about Atlas, I have to have it open, like next to me, and if I was writing a piece about it, I'm using a lot of quotes. It's a good book. There's a lot of good quotes. There was a quote earlier in the piece, but I don't know. I feel like this has to be concretized more. Recognizing this point. So there's a back reference to this. No, I'm just doing writing criticism. Can improve your life immensely if you simply shrug. See, but the thing is that you could misapply the sanction of the victim idea, particularly if you don't have a real concrete sense of when that applies and can think of a bunch of different examples and examples of when it doesn't apply. Often in relationships, like there are relationships where like somebody is really one party is really victimizing another party, and that other party is giving them some sanction in some way, and that's bad. So like the idea does have some real scope, but often, and this is very well known, um, like both parties are kind of not being at their best in a relationship. Um, and both have some responsibility, and both are interpreting things in a certain way that the other person is saying when there might be a different interpretation that would also be reasonable and maybe a bit kinder. There's communication problems. There's all sorts of things. Um, and I just worry that you could take like the sanction of a victim idea and somebody could read this. Maybe somebody, be somebody who likes Rand, right? And be like, oh yeah, that fight we had, I was totally giving the sanction of the victim, and it's really just like a normal, like not especially great relationship dynamic, but not something that you necessarily want to blow up with some potential misunderstanding of an objectivist idea. Anyway, uh, this is, yeah, recognizing this point can improve your life immensely if you simply shrug, naming what's happening, and refusing to agree to the other person's rules is a first step to happiness, either by changing the rules or ending the arrangement. But first, you must recognize the role played by your passive acceptance of a rigged system. This is just too vague and high level, and there's not any details. Um, it's at like the 30,000 foot summary level, without explaining and differentiating different cases. Let's see. You can see this idea at work in the office as well. coworkers who make you miserable often do so because they are able to convince you to play office politics by their rules they created, and those rules are likely to make you the loser. I don't know that it's the case that the people, like the coworkers at the office, actually created the rules for the office politics game. That doesn't, I think there's sort of like there can be nuances depending on like the particular industry or the particular personalities in the office, but I think there's sort of general rules and dynamics. So I don't know. I don't know about that. I think office politics isn't really good, but that doesn't. The basic issue there, I don't think, is sanction of the victim. So much as like you shouldn't spend a lot of time playing social games in general, or any time, maybe. Playing social games. Instead, you should be more focused on productivity and reality and, you know, more rational virtues. What Atlas Shrugged ultimately asks us to consider is whether we have thought carefully about the moral rules and ethical principles that we explicitly or implicitly accept. If you're unhappy with your life, and especially with your various professional or interpersonal relationships, it is worth asking whether that unhappiness is of a kind with Atlas trying to carry a weight that he cannot possibly support. Sure, it's worth asking. If so, withdraw your sanction of the rules of a rigged game, shrug off that weight, find new rules or different players, as Rand emphasized. Your happiness is within your grasp. If only you recognize your role in making it possible. And then, this is a good quote, but yeah, I did not like this essay. It was like too ambitious in the point it was trying to make without enough quotes and substantiation and fleshing out the argument. And then it spoke at a very high level about various things in a way that I found unconvincing. Like, particularly when I tried to move from the book to applying lessons to real life, what it was discussing just didn't really seem to land with me. So yeah, not a great piece in my estimation. Let's see if I want to do another one. Also, it was just like, for what it was trying to say, it was very short. Like, it was short, it was light on quotes, it was very kind of abstract in how it talked about things. So, all right. Do I want to do another one? Maybe do another short one. I kind of want to read one of the anti-Trump flames. I don't know. I don't know why. Let's see. Crony in Chief. Oh, that's long. I don't want to read that. Let's look at Trump's ego is actually too small. Fine. Okay. Long before Donald Trump became a controversial political figure, he was a household name for his phenomenal ego. He first rose to fame as a larger-than-life real estate tycoon. By cultivating the media, Trump became the poster boy for the gilded go-go 80s. Okay. Ostentatious capitalist anti-hero. Sought to rename the Empire State Building. I didn't know that. Is the problem really that his ego is too big, or is it actually too small? I'm just going to go through this quickly. If anything, Trump is not self-oriented enough, but rather far too other-oriented. He is unhealthily preoccupied with receiving from others favorable comparisons to others. This is exhibited. His fixation on receiving due credit from the media and the public for the relative size of his hands, his crowds, and his ratings. Right. So, like, I feel like I'm getting the sense already. The thing is, though, so they're indicting him morally for being a second-hander. Okay. So is like every other politician. Some of them are way smoother about it. But like, really, you don't think that Obama liked hearing, his voice being projected out to a big crowd or something? Like, they're all second-handers. John Galt's not on the ticket. So, in light of that, like, who cares? What does it matter? And so this guy's going to argue, and he says, such weakness of ego is especially dangerous in a commander-in-chief of a superpower's armed forces. The media exacerbates that danger by only giving Trump the adulation he craves whenever he threatens or attacks rogue nations. Now this is a weird criticism because by recent historical standards, Trump has been so restrained. And if you recall, during the election, the thing that one of the memes, one of the forced memes that you heard over and over and over again, is basically that Trump was going to blow up the world, and start a war because, I don't know, somebody would say on Twitter that, his dick was small or something, and then he would just like vaporize them. It's complete nonsense. But then in actuality, other than eradicating ISIS and this, I guess this missile strike that they're going to talk about in Syria, his foreign engagement, he's saber rattled a lot, but it's mostly been rattling and not striking things. So to say he's, I think the actual record shows he's not particularly militant or warmongery. It says his drive-by bombing has already earned him strained new respect from neoconservative never-Trumpers. Yeah, that sure went in the toilet after 5 minutes, didn't it? Who appear to believe that the mercurial celebriality. Oh no, that was intentional. I thought it was a typo at first. Billionaire is at least frightening. Is at his least frightening when he's literally blowing things up. Yeah. Whatever. As much as he disdains the media establishment, Trump revels in this sort of praise. It may not be long before he free associates about it in interviews. When the glow fades, he may be tempted to light it up again. Well, I guess that didn't really. Even get the guy to send the troops out when people are seceding in the United States, for Christ's sake. Wow, they're gonna smear him as a white nationalist too. I find growing fringe an interesting turn of phrase. I find it interesting as a factual claim, first of all, because, like, citation needed that it's growing. Like, maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know that Dan Sanchez knows either. And then also there's this sort of, there's a literary, a writing tension there. On the one hand, you want to portray it as scary, so you say it's growing. But on the other hand, you want to portray it as this like freak, low status, evil thing. So you say it's a fringe. And so you say it's a growing fringe, and it's a little at cross purposes. He mentions SJWs too. I'm not gonna really read this one. It's the other one was interesting because it was making uh a moral analysis of Atlas Shrugged, and like, even though I didn't think it was very good, like it had stuff to say and I had stuff to say, and so it was like a dialogue. Whereas this is just like mostly using Nathaniel Brandon to flame Trump, which I'm not super into. So yeah. Okay. I think I'll wrap this up.